It's my honor and privilege today to introduce our next speaker. I've known him for 20 years, and I knew him before he entered politics, and I have to say he is the real deal. Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the Conservative Party and the official opposition. He's fighting to restore Canada's promise. Pierre's Conservatives will fight for Canada, and we will be rewarded for hard work. He will put Canadians back in control of their government, their lives, and their futures. Pierre is a proud Canadian. He and his wife Anna have 2 children, Valentina and Cruz, and their story is a great Canadian story. Pierre grew up with adoptive parents in Calgary, and Anna immigrated with her parents from Venezuela to Montreal. This is what drives Pierre. Pierre wants to restore the Canadian dream for everyone, a country where it doesn't matter whether your name is Smith or Sandhu, Martin or Mohammed, Chang or Charles. He wants to make this country a country where everyone can achieve their dream, a country where the son of a teenage mother adopted by 2 teachers can dare to run for the Prime Minister of Canada. In Parliament, we all know Pierre has long been a relentless champion of ordinary Canadians. He was one of the first voices to predict Trudeau's record spending would lead to inflation and the crisis that we see ourselves in now. As Prime Minister, he will lead a government that unleashes Canada's great potential and will turn hurt into hope. He will stop the out-of-control inflationary spending that has made life increasingly unaffordable for everyone. He'll axe the carbon tax. And he'll restore fiscal sanity to Ottawa. He'll remove the gatekeepers that block Canadians from making things here at home. Instead of creating more cash, his government will create more of what cash buys. He'll have more homes built, produce more food, create more energy, more goods right here in Canada. He'll restore safety in our streets and unite Canadians by ending divide and conquer politics of Justin Trudeau. He'll end the billion-dollar media subsidies that make journalists dependent on the whims of the state, and will turn the CBC building in Ottawa into affordable housing for hard-working Canadians. Pierre believes in a country where the state is the servant, not the master, where smaller government makes room for bigger citizens, where people can build a business without red tape and heavy taxes. Under Pierre's leadership, Ottawa will finally get out of the way of Canadians' futures. I know he can do it. I know he will do it. Please join me in welcoming Pierre Poilievre.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Canada Strong and Free. Thank you very much, Veso Sobat. I met Veso 20 years ago, and I said, Ves, I want to get into politics and run for office. I need your advice. And he sat me down in his office, and on the wall there was a big fish that he'd caught. And he pointed up to it, and he said, Pierre, you see that fish up there? If he kept his mouth shut, he'd still be alive. I never listened to his advice. Probably would have gotten a little less trouble over the years if I had, but you know what? Making noise is part of the job on Parliament Hill. And one person who made a lot of noise and did a lot of good was the great Preston Manning. Thank you very much for your role as statesman to our movement, Preston. I first saw Preston Manning driving in the back seat of my parents' car, headed south down McLeod Trail in Calgary, where I was growing up, and there was a big billboard with a picture of him and his fist in the air with one word, enough. Boy, oh boy, would that word ever sum up the situation we have here in Canada today, wouldn't it? And then we have the great Stephen Harper, who addressed this crowd yesterday. Don't you miss him yet? Sure, it'd be nice to have a prime minister again that doesn't admire China's basic communist dictatorship, right? You know, speaking of Trudeau, though, you know, speaking of housing, as Vesso mentioned the subject of housing, Stephen Harper really does live rent-free in Justin Trudeau's head. He's still talking about him, still blaming him. And yesterday, in the House of Commons, we got debating infrastructure. And he claimed that Harper had spent infrastructure money building gazebos and doorknobs, to which I replied that the current government had as its very first infrastructure the installation of a brand new doorknob in the Prime Minister's office. That took you a minute there. But really, how's it looking after 8 years? You know, we had a deal in this country, didn't we? You work hard, follow the law, you get a good house in a good, safe neighborhood, you make a good living and a great life. But that deal, just like everything else after 8 years in Justin Trudeau's Canada, is broken. The deal is broken. Look around you. We have 35-year-olds living in their parents' basements because the cost of housing, of mortgage payments, rent payments, and down payments has literally doubled under his watch. Look at the single mother who's cutting back on meals so that her kids don't have to. Look at the seniors that choose between eating and heating because he's raising the carbon tax on the price of gas and home heating oil. And look at the danger in our streets. I arrived in Nanaimo the other day, and within 5 minutes of getting off the plane, I realized how bad things were. The pilot walked up, showed me a picture on his phone of his surveillance camera at 12:48 a.m. a few nights earlier, where 2 methamphetamine addicts were doing drugs, carrying around daggers and billy clubs in his backyard, scavenging for goods they could steal. I then learned that a local man had his tools stolen by some addicts who were living in a tent city. He went to get the tools back, and they shot him. And so he was then in a coma. I walked a little further, and I saw the Nanaimo local newspaper, which indicated that overdose deaths are double at the start of this year what they were at the start of last year, even though we were told that all of this drug abuse was simply the temporary result of COVID-related mental health issues. Look across the country. We're more divided than ever, seemingly by design of a prime minister who wants to turn citizen against citizen so that he can aggrandize the power of the state. Everything feels broken. But the good news is, as Vesso pointed out, we're going to transform the hurt that Trudeau caused into the hope that Canadians need. And we're going to do it by getting back to the common sense of the common people across this country who carry the nation on their back, the quiet ones, the ones who say little but do much, the people who never show up at protests, don't have money for lobbyists, and have very little influence in political Ottawa. Those people are forgotten and often on the sidelines. But more and more I see them rising up because they feel like they're losing control of their lives. They're rising up because they want to take back control of their lives, and they want to join with us in making Canada the freest nation on earth, and that is my purpose in running for Prime Minister. We're going to bring home a Canada that works for the people who work. We're going to bring home lower prices by getting rid of the inflationary deficits and taxes that have caused it in the first place. Let's remember how we got here. Back in 2020 and 2021, the government started a massive policy of printing cash. They increased the money supply by $400 billion. That is a 20% increase in the amount of cash in circulation in the economy. They did this to spend money, much of it not even related to the COVID crisis, but on other discretionary matters. We warned them at the time that creating more cash, more money, chasing fewer goods would, as always, lead to higher prices. Of course, this is an inescapable relationship in economics that goes back thousands of years. Every time an emperor, a king, a queen, a president, or a prime minister has created cash to fund his sumptuous spending, it has resulted in exactly two things. The rich get much richer because the things they own increase in value, and the poor and the working class get much worse off. Why? Because the things they need become more expensive. It's a gigantic wealth transfer from the have-nots to the have-yachts. Why is it that all the banking economists were so supportive of this money printing exercise? Because, of course, they profited off it. CEOs saw their the price of their shares rise, and they were able to profit off the backs of the misery of working class people who saw the value of the purchasing power of their paychecks go down. Meanwhile, we have across the country today an interest rate hike meant to counter the money printing that the same central bank did not long before. And again, who's paying for that? The working class people who now can't afford homes. All of this was entirely predictable. In fact, I predicted it not because of any economic insight that wasn't already there. You could look back to the stories of, say, Dionysius, who was the ruler of the then Greek-controlled island of Sicily. And he had tried everything to create new money until he came up with the most creative idea at all. He would just confiscate the coins, and where there was a one on each drachma, he would mark 2. And all of a sudden, he doubled the money supply. He gave people back half as many coins, but each one of those coins had a 2 instead of a 1. Well, the result, of course, was that he cut the wages of the working people on the island in half, while enriching all of the people who lived inside the court and inside the castle walls. Does that not ring a bell today? A smaller and smaller group of people get richer and richer, feasting off the state and not by their own labor and their own work. So we have solutions for this. A Conservative government will cancel major spending increases, bring in a new dollar-for-dollar law that will require the government find $1 of savings for every new dollar of spending. This was instituted in the United States in the 90s. They capped spending, got rid of the deficit, paid off $400 billion of debt. But as soon as the law lapsed, they went right back into deficit, and the Americans have been in deficit ever since, which proves that politicians need legal limits on their spending, or else they will spend other people's money irresponsibly. Every creature in the universe must live by scarcity, with the fish in the seas, the birds in the trees, every creature except the politician, who can just push scarcity onto everyone else through more inflation, through more debt, and through more taxes. A legal limit that caps spending will ensure that we cut out waste, that we make the same either-or transactions that everyday single moms and small business people have to make. The people of Canada have been pinching their pennies long enough. It's time that politicians started pinching their pennies too. And we reject the idea that fighting for the environment means raising taxes on our working class. So far, Trudeau has not hit a single climate target, even though he's imposed a massive and growing carbon tax on the Canadian people. A Poilievre government will fight climate change and protect the environment with technology and not taxes. We will axe the tax and put money back in the pockets of the Canadian people. And we're going to bring home powerful paychecks by ending the war on work. We have a war on work in this country. You earn another dollar, you get penalized. I read the other day that a small child asked her father, what is a tax form? And he said, it's just like a report card, except in reverse. In a report card, the more you get the right answers, the better the grade you get. But on a tax form, the more you do the right thing, the worse you're left off. That's our tax system today. A fine is what you pay for breaking the law. A tax is what you pay for working hard. A $60,000 a year worker with 3 kids who earns another dollar today loses 80 cents in that dollar because of clawbacks, payroll taxes, income taxes, and a whole assortment of other paycheck penalties. You want to understand why we have a labor shortage? Well, if you tax labor, you get less labor. You punish people for working, you get less work. So a Poilievre government will do a massive overhaul of our tax and clawback system to ensure that it always pays to work. We're going to bring home more powerful paychecks by rewarding the hard work of the Canadian people. More powerful paychecks also means getting the gatekeepers out of the way to let people earn more. Here we are today with a doctor shortage, but yet the 19,000 foreign-trained doctors are banned from working. When they apply, they're run in circles by provincial gatekeepers that do years of study into the history of every single foreign-trained graduate. It's so bad that it's not just affecting immigrants. I recently met a young lady from Montreal who had to go to Ireland to get into med school because there were no places in Quebec. When she graduated, they wouldn't let her do a residency in Quebec, so she went to California. And after she's done in California, they won't take her back in Quebec because they don't accept California residents in the Quebec medical system. But guess what? The Irish Minister of Health wrote her a letter inviting her back to practice in that country. This is ridiculous gatekeeping, and it boils my blood to sit in hospital waiting rooms with my daughter who has a migraine headache because we have a doctor shortage when we have all of these brilliant immigrants and Canadian-born, foreign-trained doctors who could prove their competency if they were given a chance to challenge an exam. And that's why Conservatives will work with the provinces to build in the professions what already exists in the trades, which is a blue seal test so that young doctors can prove their competency based on merit, not based on where they come from, that we can get the gatekeepers out of the way and allow for more powerful, inflation-proof paychecks and more doctors and nurses in our system. And we will clear the way so that Canada can become energy independent again. We will repeal C-69 and C-48, that we can build Canadian pipelines with Canadian steel to Canadian shores. No longer will we accept the idea of bringing in foreign resources produced by dirty dictators that don't meet our standards. We will clear the way and stand behind the hardworking men and women in the cleanest and most responsible oil and gas and energy sector anywhere on planet Earth. We will get the gatekeepers out of the way to bring back our resources and our paychecks to this country. And frankly, we will actually bring homes back to this country. You know, the reason we don't have homes is because government gatekeepers prevent the construction in the first place. We actually have the fewest houses per capita of any G7 country, even though we have the most land to build on. We are actually building houses slower than we were 8 years ago, and we have fewer houses per capita than when Justin Trudeau took office because home building has not kept up with population growth. And we know why this is. We rank 64th on planet Earth for the time it takes to get a building permit. This means there's 63 other countries where you can get a building permit faster than in Canada. Meanwhile, in Vancouver, it costs $650,000 in red tape alone for every unit of housing. Once again, this protects the privileged. If they already have a mansion, it goes up in value by scarcity, but it hurts the working class by permanently shutting them out of home ownership. 9 in 10 young people believe they will never own a home. The answer, of course, is to start to leverage the prodigious funds the federal government spends on municipal infrastructure to get the gatekeepers out of the way. I think it's time to be a little less polite when it comes to the gatekeeping mayors. I know that we have this tradition where everyone is supposed to go along to get along. Well, that's not going to happen if gatekeepers prevent our young people from having homes. I will link the number of infrastructure dollars a big city gets to the number of houses it allows to be built. We will bring in real fines by clawing back federal infrastructure money to those cities that block construction and boosting those funds to cities that get out of the way and let builders build. We're going to require every single federally funded transit station to have high-density apartments around it so that our young people can live right next to the bus or the train. And then there's this big empire of big, ugly government buildings, 37,000 of them, and many of them are empty with so-called work from home. I'm going to sell off 15% of these buildings, and it warms my heart to think of the beautiful family pulling up in their U-Haul, to their wonderful new home in the former headquarters of the CBC. Are they here today, Jamil? We're also going to bring home safe streets again to our country. Violent crime has shot up 32% under Justin Trudeau's catch and release bail policies. Now, we all believe that if a young person makes a small mistake in their youth, they should get a second chance. But what he has done is brought in a system that allows criminals who've committed literally 60 and 70 serious violent offenses to get bail the same day they are newly arrested. And so in Vancouver right now, the mayors of BC have reported this. The same 40 offenders were arrested 6,000 times in 1 year. That's 150 arrests per offender per year. We wonder why crime is raging out of control in that part of the country. You know, and it's not that much better here. Just the other day, there was a holdup. A robber came up to a man, pulled a gun at another man and said, "Give me all your money." And the man said, "Do you know who I am?" And the robber said, "No." The man said, "I'm Justin Trudeau." And the robber said, "In that case, give me all my money." But joking aside, the policy of flooding our streets with repeat dangerous offenders and drugs has made life more and more dangerous. Taxpayer-funded so-called safe supply has led to more addiction, not less, the exact opposite of what we were promised. Under Trudeau, overdose deaths have gone up by 300% in British Columbia. Recently, they decriminalized heroin, crack, cocaine, and illicit fentanyl. And the problem gets worse and worse and worse. What we actually have is a misery industry. Every time you speak out against it, there's all of these experts that jump in front of media cameras saying that they've proven that these policies work. And every year it gets worse and worse and worse, but these agencies and interest groups collect bigger and bigger checks from the government to perpetuate the misery that they helped create in the first place. You know, in Vancouver now, what's happening is that the user is taking the taxpayer-funded hydromorphine, they're ripping off the labels and selling it to kids and using the profits to buy more powerful fentanyl. Those kids then find the hydromorphine is not strong enough, so then they graduate up to heroin, and when that's no longer strong enough, they graduate up to fentanyl. That is the very real tragedy that is unfolding, and we know how it all started. Powerful drug companies lied through their teeth to trick the medical system, the doctors, the nurses, the pharmacists, and the drug approval agencies into approving these drugs, not just for occasional use, but for any ache or pain. McKinsey wrote a business plan calling for the supercharging of the sales and actually recommending that there be bonuses for the number of overdoses that a distributor could cause. These corporate dirtbags knew exactly what they were doing. The American government and the states have actually sued them and recovered billions and billions of dollars to pay for recovery and treatment. A Poilievre government will launch a massive $45 billion lawsuit to make Big Pharma pay for the full cost of recovery and treatment so that we can help rescue our brothers and sisters from the scourge of addiction. And we're going to bring back and bring home freedom to this country again. And I can't think of a better place to talk about that than at an event held by Jamil Jivani, who has courageously stood up against Woke Inc., right? He apparently expresses viewpoints that the corporate establishment does not think is appropriate for someone like him. They had a whole series of politically correct ideas that he was expected to regurgitate on the airwaves. He said, no, I'm going to stand up for my own values, the values for which I stand and with which I was raised. That built him big audiences and success with his listeners, but it made the corporate elite very unhappy and probably out of favor with the regulators that they so desperately want to impress. This is woke Inc. It's about large corporations in regulated oligopolies winning political favor by throwing around politically correct statements and advancing an agenda that makes no sense to anyone but them. This woke movement is an attack on the freedom of speech of ordinary people and the common sense of Canadians. And in Pierre Poilievre, Canadians will have someone who will stand up against woke corporations and for the rights of every single person to express themselves freely in a free country. And nowhere is that more urgently needed than when it comes to Bill C-11, a bill that would give the CRTC the ability to manipulate the algorithms that determine what shows up in your news feed. Now, they claim that this is simply to promote Canadian content, although they have yet to tell us what Canadian content actually is. To me, Canadian content is anything that is posted online by a Canadian. Right? We have 37 million Canadian content producers. They believe that it's only a small approved list of true experts in Canadiana who can be promoted. But if they are promoted up the algorithmic food chain, everyone else has to be demoted because there's only so much space on the screen. And that is exactly what this is really about. It's about taking the Broadcasting Act and applying it to the entire internet. It's about having a small group of unnamed bureaucrats telling Canadians what they can see and say online. We have the same problem on our university campuses, and now increasingly even in our professional bodies. We saw how they forced Jordan Peterson to hold on to his integrity by leaving the University of Toronto so that he wouldn't have to bend his knee before the censors there. And now they're trying to take away his license to practice as a psychologist, even though he's probably one of the most renowned psychologists anywhere in the world, simply because he will not, because he retweeted me, actually. Actually, one of the reasons they cited when they threatened to take away his license. Don't worry, though. They've allowed him to go in for retraining. Sponge his mind of all of these unacceptable thoughts. Here's my suggestion to them. If you don't like Jordan Peterson's views, try debating him. Good luck with that. Right? But we have something in our Constitution called Section 2B, the freedom of expression. To be or not to be? That is the question. My answer is that a Poilievre government will not only repeal the censorship law C-11, but we will require every university that gets federal funds to commit itself to honoring the freedom of expression that we are guaranteed in our Charter of Rights. We will respect the ancestral freedoms of our Indigenous people to continue hunting by keeping their hunting rifles. We will stand up for firearms owners and go after real criminals. But on these and all other issues, what you see is a singular purpose to every single policy that comes out of this government and out of the political establishment in Ottawa. Think about it. Everything they do is about a single solution. Doesn't matter what the problem is. Racism or misinformation online, they need censorship by a guy who was a practicing racist for most of his adult life, right? Violence, instead of going after criminals, they need to control whether people use hunting rifles. Poverty, they need to control more of the people's money in order that it would be spread around more fairly, which in reality means giving it all to them. Economics, when it comes to industry, instead of getting out of the way, they believe in scooping up everybody's money and picking which corporate winners get a handout. In each case, they always have one solution: less freedom for you and more control for them. Now, they have to find a way to justify this, right? Because if they believe that the human species, a member of the human species is not capable of thinking for himself, then how could he possibly be capable of thinking for everyone else? Well, the answer they will give is that there's a special type of human made of better clay, more enlightened and virtuous, all-knowing to protect us against misinformation and crazy ideas that might circulate. You saw this just the other day when Justin Trudeau gave a rambling talk about the growing pandemic of people who believe in a flat earth. Did you see this? He actually gave a talk about how never before in human history, he claims, did anyone believe that there was such a thing as a flat earth. Okay. That's what he said. I'm not kidding. But then along came the internet, and this crazy idea was born, and it's spreading like wildfire. And if he doesn't control the internet, more and more people will be convinced that there's a flat earth. I'm not kidding you. This is actually, you can go and Google it, look it up on YouTube tonight before it's censored by C11. Look it up, seriously. But that is, this is, most of the remarks, by the way, were themselves filled with misinformation, which in it demonstrates the ultimate contradiction of censorship. Because the censor is obviously subject to the same human frailties as everyone else, potential dishonesty, or in this case, probable ignorance. But in any case, we know that whatever frailties and mistakes that an individual might make in reading information that he finds online or anyone else could be made by the censor himself. Who watches The Watchmen is ultimately the contradiction that the censor must overcome. But in order to avoid overcoming the contradiction, what they do is insult the people. You see, to make government big, you have to make the people small. And that is the origin of the small fringe minority comment that Trudeau has now apologized for. Pointing his finger and calling anyone that asks questions about a foreign dictatorship's interference in our democracy a racist is one way to keep the tough questions away. But every day you will see him try to denigrate the intelligence and the goodwill of the everyday common person. That is the only way to justify exerting more and more control from the top onto everyone else. You know, the real geniuses in politics understood how little they actually knew. Winston Churchill, for example. Okay, there's a guy with a brain. 58 volumes of Nobel Prize-winning literature foretold the rise and the aggression of Hitler, foretold the Cold War when he said that the Iron Curtain was settling across the middle of Europe, invented the battle tank, predicted what we now have as an iPad or a tablet back in the early 1930s, an incredible brain, but yet he knew how little he knew. He actually became a bricklayer and joined the Bricklayers Union to remind himself how brilliant the common man was. And he knew that after he left his brick wall, but before the grout settled, his aides would have to come and reset the bricks because he'd done such a bad job of it, right? But that was because he honored the common people. One of my favorite stories of him was not his great witticisms or his powerful speeches. He was walking in the streets of London after one of the big Nazi raids had toppled buildings. And he used to go out and listen to the common people, hear their stories. And one day he happened upon a lady who'd been trapped under rubble. And so he went with his team and they scraped away the rocks and dust and they helped her to her feet. And she was shaking and trembling, and she looked him in his eyes and said, "Thank you." And as she was helped away, he stood in stone silence. And his staff noticed there were tears pouring down his face. And after a few moments, he said, "There goes greatness." What he meant by that was that wars were not won by kings or queens or even generals. They were not even won by prime ministers. They were won by the defiance of the everyday common person. You see, it was the sophisticated aristocrats that wanted to give in to Hitler, that believed that he could be appeased. It was actually the common people on the ground that stood up, that had the most to lose. who stood up and fought back. It was the tea ladies who rushed to go and work in the munition factories. It was the truck driver who got out of his truck and shouldered a rifle to go to the front lines, charging out of the trenches and into harm's way. It was the courageous ones that stood on their rooftops throwing rocks defiantly at Nazi warplanes that went overhead. It was the everyday common people that were the great ones. Now, we have those great people here today. In fact, if you want to see goodness, greatness, and genius, don't look to those above, look to those all around you. You know, we often call these the ordinary people, but I'll tell you, they are not ordinary. They are extraordinary. The single mother, the single mom that I meet who works on her feet all day, comes home, teaches her kids math, and balances her family budget on a minimum wage salary, she is not ordinary. She is extraordinary. The farmer that masters the sciences of soil and storm to bring food from his field to your fork is not ordinary. He is extraordinary. The electrician who captures lightning, runs it through a copper wire to light up your home, tames the most fierce force in nature to make us all comfortable and happy and illuminate this room. He is not ordinary. He is extraordinary. The policewoman who dodges bullets by day and reads bedtime stories to her children at night is not ordinary. She is extraordinary. These people are meant to be masters in their own homes, even though they're not famous. When they die, there are no headlines in the newspapers. There are no eulogies on the floor of the House of Commons. But when they walk through Heaven's Gate, the trumpets sound for them, because God knows that they carried their families, their neighbors, and their nation on their shoulders. And a quiet murmur goes out from the hosts of heaven. There goes greatness. Our jobs, my friend, our jobs, my friends, are to be the champions of these people, the common sense of the common people, united for our common home. Canada, your home, my home, our home. Let's bring it home. Thank you very much.